Jesus once presented a vivid architectural nightmare to a crowd of ambitious followers. He asked them to imagine a man who decided to build a massive, impressive tower. The man had the vision, the land, and the initial excitement. He started digging the foundation and laying the first rows of heavy stone, but as the structure began to rise, his pockets ran dry. He hadn't bothered to sit down and do the math before the first shovel hit the dirt. Now he stands in the middle of a construction site that looks like a graveyard of broken dreams. The neighbors walk by, pointing and laughing at the half-finished shell. They don't see a visionary, they see a fool who was too arrogant to count the cost. He has lost his capital, his reputation, and his future, all because he fell in love with the idea of a tower but hated the logic of the budget. In the world of business and investment, enthusiasm without a spreadsheet is a suicide mission. Most people fail not because they lack talent, but because they refuse to perform a stress test on their own ambitions. They jump into markets based on a gut feeling or start businesses fueled by pure adrenaline, only to realize 6 months later that they are hemorrhaging cash and have no exit strategy. Real wealth is built by the person who sits down in the quiet, long before the public launch, and calculates every single brick, every hour of labor, and every possible delay. You must be willing to look at the cold, hard numbers and ask, can I finish what I start? If the math doesn't work, the dream is just a hallucination. Self-discipline starts with your accounting. It's about having the maturity to kill a bad idea on paper before it kills your bank account in reality. Don't be the person with a half-built life that everyone uses as a cautionary tale. Count the cost, verify the resources, and only then start building. A group of clever enemies thought they had finally cornered Jesus. They brought a Roman coin, a symbol of the occupying power that everyone hated, and tried to force him into a political trap regarding taxes. They wanted him to be a rebel or a sellout. But Jesus didn't get emotional about the politics of the coin. He didn't launch a protest against the unfairness of the Roman tax system. He simply looked at the physical object in his hand and asked whose image and inscription is on this. When they replied, Caesar's, he delivered a masterclass in strategic boundaries. Then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. He recognized the operating system he was living in. He didn't waste his energy fighting a stone wall. He used the rules of the system to maintain his own sovereignty and keep his mission moving forward without unnecessary interference. The most successful players in the jungle are not the ones who spend their lives complaining about the system, the taxes, or the regulations. They are the ones who understand the image on the coin. Every market has a set of existing rules, gatekeepers, and power structures. If you waste your prime years trying to fight the inevitable, you will end up broke and bitter. True wealth logic is about dimensional attack. You operate within the rules so efficiently that the rules no longer limit you. You pay what is owed, you follow the protocols, and you use the existing infrastructure to build your own empire. While your competitors are busy getting martyred by trying to overthrow the system, you are busy leveraging the system to fund your vision. Don't let your ego get in the way of your efficiency. If Caesar owns the currency, let him have his cut, but make sure you keep the territory that Caesar can't touch: your mind, your strategy, and your long-term wealth. Winners don't fight the game, they master the game so well that they can eventually afford to change it. There was a landowner who went out at 6 a.m. to hire workers for his vineyard, agreeing to pay them a standard daily wage. Throughout the day, at noon, 3 p.m. and even 5 p.m., he kept hiring more people. When the sun went down, he called everyone together to get paid. He started with the people who had only worked for 1 hour and gave them a full day's wage. When the men who had been sweating in the heat since dawn saw this, their eyes lit up. They expected a massive bonus. But the owner handed them exactly what they had agreed upon in the morning: 1 day's wage. They were furious. They started complaining about the unfairness of it all, comparing their hard labor to the easy hour the others had spent. The owner looked at them and said, "Friend, I haven't cheated you. Didn't you agree to work for this amount? Take your pay and go. Am I not allowed to do what I want with my own money? The market does not pay you based on how hard you work or how much you sweat. It pays you based on the contract you signed and the results you delivered." One of the greatest traps of a poverty mindset is the obsession with fairness and social comparison. If you spend your time staring into someone else's pocket to see if they got a better deal than you will lose your focus and your drive. Wealth logic is rooted in the sacredness of the contract. If you agreed to a price and the price was paid, the transaction is finished. The fact that someone else got lucky or worked less for more is irrelevant to your progress. Jealousy is a tax on your energy that yields zero return. Instead of whining about the luck of others, focus on your own negotiation skills and your own output. The owner of the vineyard represents the market. It is indifferent to your feelings and only honors the agreement. If you want more money, negotiate a better contract or find a different vineyard. But never, ever let the bonus of a neighbor distract you from the gold in your own hand. The sun was beginning to rise over the Sea of Galilee, casting a golden light on a scene of utter exhaustion. Peter and his crew were standing on the shore, their shoulders slumped and their eyes red from lack of sleep. They were professional fishermen. This was their territory, their expertise and their livelihood. They had spent the entire night out on the water, throwing the heavy nets, pulling them back in, and repeating the cycle until their muscles burned. But the result was a zero. The nets were coming up with nothing but weeds and mud. They were busy washing the nets, preparing to go home and accept the loss. Then Jesus stepped into the boat and gave a command that went against every bit of Peter's professional logic. Push out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Peter argued for a second. He was the expert after all. He had worked hard. He had done the time. But he obeyed. They sailed past the safe, familiar shallows and into the deep, dark water. The moment the nets hit the deep, the water began to boil with fish. There were so many that the nets began to tear, and the boat started to sink under the sheer weight of the wealth they had just pulled from the depths. Hard work is a requirement, but hard work in the wrong place is just a slow way to go broke. Most people spend their entire lives washing nets in the shallows, working 80 hours a week in a dying industry, clinging to outdated skills, or fighting for scraps in a saturated market. They are exhausted, but they are not rich. They mistake their fatigue for progress. They are terrified of the deep water, the new technology, the high-stakes investment, or the radical career pivot, because they can't see the bottom. But the shallows are for safety. The deep is where the massive harvests live. Real wealth doesn't come from working harder at the same unsuccessful task. It comes from having the courage to abandon your expert ego and follow the trend into the unknown. If your current lake is empty, stop trying to fish harder. Stop being a martyr for a strategy that isn't working. The deep is calling you to take a risk on a scale you've never tried before. You don't need more hustle. You need to move the boat. A young man who had achieved everything the world defines as success came running to Jesus. He was wealthy, he was influential, and he was disciplined. He had followed all the rules since he was a child. He had the houses, the livestock, and the reputation. But he felt a hollow ache in his chest. He knew there was a higher level of power and purpose that his money couldn't buy. He asked Jesus how to reach that next dimension. Jesus looked at him with love, but gave him a cold, surgical ultimatum. If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, then come, follow me. The young man's face fell. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He simply turned around and walked away in deep sorrow. He wasn't walking away from a person, he was walking away from his own future. He was a prisoner of his own success. He had built a golden cage and he realized he didn't have the key to get out. He couldn't sell because he was owned by what he possessed. In the world of wealth, there is a massive difference between an owner and a caretaker. Most people think they own their assets, but their assets actually own them. They are so afraid of losing their current status, their safe investments, or their comfortable lifestyle that they become paralyzed when it's time to pivot. They are rich young rulers who are held hostage by their own balance sheets. True wealth logic is the ability to maintain liquid sovereignty, the mental and financial freedom to liquidate everything, abandon a winning position, and go all in on a new, higher mission. If you are too attached to your current pile of gold to move when the world shifts, you aren't an entrepreneur, you are a security guard for your own money. The most dangerous state for a person to be in is comfortable enough to stay small. Real freedom is the audacity to be willing to return to zero if it means reaching a higher peak. If you can't walk away from your possessions to follow a greater vision, then you don't have wealth, you have a master. The farmer walked across his field, his hand reaching deep into a bag of precious seed. He didn't meticulously place each grain in a perfect hole, he scattered them with a broad, sweeping motion. As he worked, he watched the failure happen in real time. Some seeds landed on the hard-packed path, and the birds swooped down to devour them before they even touched the soil. Other seeds fell among the rocks. They sprouted quickly, but the sun scorched them because they had no depth. Some fell into the thorns, and as they grew, the weeds choked the life out of them. A weak man would have sat down in the dirt and wept over the lost seed. He would have analyzed the birds, blamed the rocks, and cursed the thorns. But this sower didn't stop. He didn't let the sight of dying seeds paralyze his arm. He kept walking, reaching and throwing, because he knew the math of the harvest. Eventually, his hand found the good soil, and the seeds that landed there produced a crop that was 30, 60, and 100 times what he had sown. Wealth is not a game of perfection, it is a game of probability. Most people never get rich because they are traumatized by their first lost seed. They tried one business that failed, one investment that went to zero, or one partnership that turned sour, and they decided that sowing doesn't work. They spend the rest of their lives protecting the seeds left in their bag, terrified of the birds and the thorns. But the law of the sower dictates that the only way to find the good soil is to keep throwing through the bad. In the world of high-level wealth, your job is not to ensure that every single seed grows. Your job is to stay in the field long enough to hit the 100x soil. Failure is not a sign to stop, it is just a data point in the distribution. The birds are part of the process. The rocks are part of the process. The only real disaster is running out of seeds because you were too scared to throw them. If you want a massive harvest, you have to stop crying over the seeds on the path and start increasing the frequency of your reach. Wealth belongs to the man who remains emotionally neutral in the face of loss, knowing that the good soil is inevitable for those who never stop sowing. Jesus was standing near the treasury of the temple, watching the power players of the city make their contributions. It was a grand spectacle. Wealthy men in expensive robes walked up and dumped massive amounts of gold and silver into the collection boxes. The sound of the coins hitting the metal was loud and impressive, turning heads across the courtyard. Everyone was in awe of the sheer absolute value of their wealth. But then, a poor widow walked up quietly. She reached into her worn garment and dropped in 2 tiny copper coins, 2 mites, worth less than a cent. To any onlooker, her contribution was invisible, a rounding error in the day's total. But Jesus called his followers over and made a shocking statement. This poor widow has put in more than all the others. He wasn't being sentimental. He was looking at the math of percentage versus absolute. The rich gave out of their surplus. It didn't change their lifestyle or their security, but she gave everything she had to live on. She didn't just give money, she gave her entire bet on the future. Real leverage is not about how much capital you have, it's about how much of your skin in the game you are willing to commit. Many people say, when I have $1 million, then I'll take a big risk, or when I'm successful, then I'll go all in. That is a lie. If you don't have the stomach to commit 100% of your 2 mites when you're starting out, you will never have the courage to move the lever when you have millions. The widow's mite is the ultimate secret of the elite. It's the power of the total bet. It's the audacity to look at your limited resources and say, I am putting everything on this vision. While the rich are playing it safe with their 1% surplus, the person who puts their entire 100% on the line creates a level of intensity and focus that the market eventually rewards with massive returns. Influence and wealth are not measured by the size of the check you write, but by the percentage of your soul you put behind the action. Don't wait for more to become a heavy hitter. Leverage the all you have right now. The universe doesn't respond to the absolute value of your money, it responds to the absolute depth of your conviction.